Well, thank you very much, and I'm very pleased to be here at this important conference to speak about Western Sydney Airport and the Aerotropolis that we all hope and expect will be generated and stimulated by Western Sydney Airport. So I want to speak first of all about the importance of delivering a successful airport as the foundation to building a successful Aerotropolis. I next want to talk about some of the industry segments that are going to be stimulated by the airport, and thirdly I want to touch on the cooperation between the New South Wales and Commonwealth governments as we seek to realise this vision. So if I start by making the point that you can have a successful airport without an Aerotropolis, but you can't have an Aerotropolis without a successful airport. And when you look around the world, there are some fairly sobering examples of airports that have been developed but have not been successful. Mirabel in Montreal and Ciudad Real in Spain are two examples that are frequently cited. Ciudad Real, for example, opened in 2009, closed by 2012, built around a city of 75,000 people, located more than 200 kilometres from Madrid. And according to one press report, its investors, quotes, produced a financial plan that was not based on any studies of the market or of demand that would justify the anticipated traffic. So certainly with Western Sydney Airport, we have a very clear focus on ensuring that the airport is a success, attracting airlines, passengers and freight from the outset and growing steadily, and avoiding the kind of errors that tripped up those two airports that I've mentioned. Let me highlight four factors which I think give confidence on this front. The first is the need for aviation capacity in Sydney, as highlighted by the 2012 joint study on aviation capacity, which found that Kingsford Smith Airport does not have enough capacity to meet the rapidly growing demand. By 2027, there'll be no more slots at Kingsford Smith Airport. By the mid to late 2030s, no more capacity, even if smaller aircraft in slots are replaced with larger aircraft. And at the same time, of course, demand growing substantially with increases in flights and passengers carried and in freight. If we just take international flights, in August 2017, international passenger traffic was 6.3% up on the corresponding month a year earlier, and freight was 13% up. So we're now in a position where from 2026, Sydney's aviation growth will be split across the two airports until Sydney Airport hits its capacity constraints, and from that point, all new growth will need to come from Western Sydney Airport. The second factor is that Western Sydney Airport will have a substantial catchment area. Over 2 million people will be closer to Western Sydney Airport than to Kingsford Smith. As one airline chief executive pointed out to me, he has customers living in Western Sydney who today can pay $69 for a flight from Sydney to Melbourne, but $180 in cab fares to get to and from Kingsford Smith. The importance of an airport's catchment area was reinforced to me last year visiting Gatwick, Luton and Heathrow airports in London. At both Gatwick and Luton, the management teams emphasised the importance of the catchment area. People who are closer to their airport than to the other airports in the London area. And for Luton, this means people to the north of London, for Gatwick, people to the south. And so that catchment area is a very significant factor. A third factor is that in choosing the board and the management team of WSACO, we're placing a premium on people who can craft an effective competitive strategy for Western Sydney Airport. In particular, WSACO Chairman Paul O'Sullivan is a former Chief Executive of Optus, which gives him unparalleled experience in building a successful infrastructure business competing against a well-established incumbent. And that brings me to a fourth factor, developing a clear strategy in the segments where Western Sydney Airport will be competitive from the outset. Now, to be clear, from its opening, Western Sydney Airport will service all segments of the market. It will be a full-service airport, offering domestic, international and freight, capable of handling the largest passenger plane currently in use, the A380. But in its early years, it's important to have a clear understanding of the market segments where Western Sydney Airport will have an advantage. And one such segment is low-cost carriers and leisure carriers, serving destinations such as Australia's other capital cities, New Zealand, and holiday destinations like Bali. And for these operators, the airport's catchment area offers an attractive market opportunity. Now, just to be clear, I've seen some commentary which criticises the idea of Western Sydney Airport as a low-cost or a discount airport. That's a misunderstanding. Low-cost carriers today represent 16.5% of international passenger traffic in Australia, and that's up from 15.8% just 2 years ago. In the domestic market, low-cost carriers have taken significant market share, and going from 8% in 2005 to 31% in 2013. As Qantas CEO Alan Joyce has publicly mused, we could see Western Sydney Airport as potentially a base for Jetstar. He's commented that in London, British Airways operates out of Heathrow and Ryanair out of Stansted, and a similar model could work for Jetstar at Western Sydney Airport. So if the first sector where the airport will have a competitive advantage from the outset is low-cost and leisure carriers servicing Western Sydney Airport's catchment area, the second segment is inbound international carriers unable to secure a slot at Kingsford Smith. And for example, Kathy Zhang of China Eastern last year said that because Kingsford Smith was so close to its capacity, it was hard to start new flights into Sydney. And she added, the second airport facility and infrastructure is very important if we are opening the skies. And of course, the third segment, where Western Sydney Airport will be well positioned right from the outset, is freight. The capacity for 24-hour operations, together with a location in Western Sydney close to so many logistics facilities, gives the airport some real strengths. And it's on the back of this approach to competitive strategy that the first phase of Western Sydney's operations is planned to commence with passengers at around 3 to 5 million a year from 2026 and reaching around 10 million passengers a year by the early 2030s. So let me turn next then to the way that the airport is likely to attract and stimulate industry activity in the surrounding region. There are many possibilities, but I want to just focus on 4 specific sectors in particular. The first is agriculture and agribusiness, a sector with substantial existing export activity. For example, premium Australian perishables like meat, seafood and dairy products make up approximately 60% of outbound air freight from Kingsford Smith by volume. The proximity of rapidly growing Asian markets, the superior market access made possible by the Turnbull government's free trade deals with countries like China, Japan and Korea means that there are favourable conditions for building extra export volumes, and a conveniently located new airport offers an efficient way to get those volumes to market. Already Western Sydney is a gateway for produce from across the nation, with all major retailers having their New South Wales fresh distribution centres located in the Western Sydney region. New South Wales farmers have recently proposed building on these factors to create a fresh food precinct located near Western Sydney Airport. There are plenty of examples around the world of the economic value generated by a strong relationship between an airport and the agribusiness sector. One good example is Schiphol in Amsterdam. More than half of the world's cut flowers are bought and sold at the auction at Aalsmeer near Schiphol. Closer to home, work's underway on the Toowoomba Integrated Milk Project, located close to Wellcamp Airport, and the factory there will leverage access for fresh and UHT milk for domestic and international markets. In a 2016 survey of high-value Chinese customers, Australia ranked second out of 20 countries for quality of agriculture products used in food production. And this is another factor suggesting that well-located Australian airports, including Toowoomba and Western Sydney Airport, are very well placed to be key nodes in the export of Australian produce. The second obvious industry to benefit from Western Sydney Airport is tourism. It's a very close relationship between aviation and tourism. There were 156 million passenger movements through Australian airports in 2016-17, contributing to a tourism sector that added $53 billion to Australia's GDP. And there's significant growth expected, with international tourism demand projected to grow by 4.5% per annum. As one indicator, at Scenic World in the Blue Mountains, domestic visitors have increased 40.7% over the past 3 years. Chinese visitation has gone up 47.2% in that time. Clearly there'll be a national impact on tourism from Western Sydney Airport, but we can also expect a local impact. And indeed there's already significant investment occurring in Western Sydney tourism. There's a new Holiday Inn nearing completion at St Mary's. The new $45 million Western Sydney Zoo will open in 2019. Scenic World in the Blue Mountains has just completed a $3 million upgrade of the Scenic Skyway. Accor Hotels has announced plans for a new M Gallery by Sofitel Hotel at the English Riverside Stables at Warwick Farm. Accor Hotels Chief Operating Officer Simon McGrath was quoted as saying, "The new airport will be fantastic for Western Sydney. It's an incredibly exciting location to be involved in." So we are seeing plenty of investments already being announced. A third area of significant opportunity is the defence and aerospace sector. Globally, there are plenty of examples of the close relationships between airports and facilities for this sector. The jet engine company Rolls-Royce has engine maintenance facilities located adjacent to Changi Airport in Singapore. Lockheed Martin has a very large operation in the business park next to Dallas-Fort Worth Airport in Texas. And clearly leveraging the Turnbull government's unprecedented defence procurement spend is an obvious opportunity. Recently, the giant US defence contractor Northrop Grumman announced that it would invest $50 million in an electronic sustainment centre of excellence to be located near Western Sydney Airport, and that said they expected their Australian employees to rise from 500 to 1,000 as a consequence. As a recent report prepared for Liverpool Council by PwC notes, defence also positively impacts a wide range of other industries and has a strong track record of working with universities to develop and disseminate technology and develop the workforce required by industry. The final Aerotropolis growth sector I want to touch on briefly today is advanced logistics, because Western Sydney Airport is well located to be a logistics hub. Already we're seeing significant logistics investment in the region. Recently, the Prime Minister and I visited the TNT Express logistics facility at Erskine Park, opened just over 2 years ago, and one factor in the location choice was the convenient access to the future Western Sydney Airport. And this again is consistent with the experience at airports around the world. Dallas-Fort Worth's International Commerce Park Logistics Centre has grown to provide over 3,000 jobs and contribute almost $330 million to the local economy. I've given examples today drawn from 4 specific sectors where we're already seeing strong evidence of businesses being attracted to locate near Western Sydney Airport. Let me hasten to add that there are plenty of other sectors where we expect strong interest and strong investment. Advanced manufacturing, science and research, medical and healthcare, to mention just a few. I'm very confident that we are going to see investment and economic activity across a wide range of sectors, and that's something we need to see if we're to succeed in establishing an Aerotropolis. Of course, one of the other priorities is the approach to urban planning around the airport. And that brings me to the last area I want to touch on today, the close cooperation between the Commonwealth and state governments. Certainly the Commonwealth Government is working closely with the Greater Sydney Commission on the strategic planning for the region, and the Greater Sydney Commission, of course, has recently released drafts of a new Greater Sydney Region Plan and a new Western Sydney City District Plan, with a vision for the region as a city cluster, leveraging both existing centres and the new airport. And of course, more detail will come in the Land Use and Infrastructure Plan to be released by the New South Wales Government in coming months. The Greater Sydney Commission's work is aligned to the transport planning work being undertaken by the Berejiklian and the Turnbull governments for Western Sydney. We're working closely together to ensure that the new airport has first-class ground transport connectivity. This includes the jointly funded $3.6 billion Western Sydney Infrastructure Plan, with work already underway on the Northern Road and a number of other roads within that plan. And of course, that plan also includes the new M12 motorway that will connect the airport to the M7 and to Sydney's motorway network. The two governments also have work underway on a scoping study into the rail needs of Western Sydney and Western Sydney Airport. That report is now with the two governments, and we'll have more to say on the way forward in coming months. And of course, we're also working together and in conjunction with local councils on agreeing our shared priorities through the Western Sydney City Deal, a framework to bring together all 3 tiers of government in the development of the Western Parkland City. So Western Sydney Airport is an opportunity to shape the development of Western Sydney for decades to come, and all 3 levels of government are working closely together. We do have here a truly remarkable opportunity. We have a powerful combination of factors, including a new airport with well-founded expectations of strong growth, very healthy prospects for attracting investment, businesses and jobs to the region, significant expected population growth in the region, a substantial expanse of largely undeveloped land in the region around the airport, and a structured approach to land use and transport planning with the Commonwealth and state governments working closely together. There has never been a better opportunity in Australia to turn the Aerotropolis vision into practical reality. And if we get it right, we will not only deliver a great airport, we will establish a vibrant, economically successful and highly livable new community in Western Sydney. Thank you.
Well, all I can say is what an amazing time it is to be writing about transport. We have all these major projects underway. We've got the Metro, we've got Parramatta Light Rail here in the CBD, and finally we have within 8 years we're going to have an airport opening to planes full of passengers. So I guess one of the key considerations when it comes to the airport minister is around transport links. And I'm just interested to hear from you what your preference is when it comes to rail links to Western Sydney Airport.
There is, as I mentioned in my speech, an enormous amount of planning work going on between the two governments to answer that question. So the scoping study was charged with asking the question, what's the right route for rail to Western Sydney Airport? When should it be built? How much will it cost? How should it be funded? Clearly, the Commonwealth, as we've consistently said, is working on ensuring the airport is rail ready. We've allocated quite a lot of money towards that. All of the planning includes the rail corridor on the airport land itself. The planning also includes provision for where stations would be and so on the airport land. Then the question becomes, as the scoping study is charged with answering, what is the right route? As the discussion paper that came out last year makes clear, there are broadly 3 corridors. There's the east-west corridor running from the airport to Parramatta. There's the extension from Leppington, from the existing heavy rail where that terminates. And then there's the north-south corridor, which would run from Campbelltown and Narellan through Bringelly, through the airport, join the T1 Western Line, probably at St Mary's, and then run further north and ultimately meet where Sydney Metro Northwest will terminate at Cudgegong Road or at Schofields nearby. Now, all of that trips off the tongue very easily. When you add that up, that's probably 30 billion plus worth of rail investment. So clearly a factor that both the state government and the Commonwealth government are thinking about very carefully is how is that to be funded and what's the right time to build it, and that is exactly what the scoping study is looking at. Let me conclude my observation by saying you can't make the case for rail on the basis of the airport traffic alone, and I don't think that's a particularly controversial proposition, but to put that another way, we need to make our decision having regard to the impact that the rail will have on the community that is intended to be developed, the third Western Parkland city essentially. And so certainly from my perspective, I think the arguments in favour of a north-south link are stronger in terms of the city shaping impact of that. Obviously there's a lot of work to do, and as I said in my speech, we'll have more to say in coming months, but I close by making this observation that I guess what the scoping study has laid out, and as was countenanced in the discussion paper, is, in essence a vision or a way forward over a 10, 20, 30, 40, 50 year period. And one of the distinctive features of the opportunity that we have here is that we are looking at some very long-term planning, as well as, of course, wanting to get benefits in terms of economic growth and so on as early in that period as possible.
So can I just pick you up on why exactly it is that you would be sort of more in favour of a north-south alignment rather than east-west to the airport?
I think it does have greater city shaping potential. That's certainly been a very strong argument from the Western Sydney councils. With the vision of the Badgerys Creek site and the industry and business to locate around it being the jobs hub, then it does make sense to be saying, okay, how can you have transport arrangements which facilitate people getting to and from the airport from within Western Sydney? And so that, I think, is an argument. On that criterion, north-south scores higher. It's also worth making the point, as I talked about a bit in my speech, that in those early years, say 2026 to 2040, the airport's focus is likely to be on the catchment area, the 2 million people who are closer to Western Sydney Airport than to Kingsford Smith. Clearly, as time moves on, it will also increasingly be supporting the business market and people wanting to travel into the greater metropolitan area of Sydney, and so the east-west will become more important. But if you look at what's a better alignment with the airport strategy in the early years, I think north-south has some merit there. So that would be my thinking.
And what timeframes are we talking? Would it be fair to say that there will not be a rail line to this new airport come 2026 at its opening?
So again, what I'd say on that is, as I've said many times, is that there's a scoping study that's before the two governments. We're working through all of that in a very collaborative way, and we'll have more to say about the way forward in coming months.
Now, we've heard a lot today about Sydney Metro, or Sydney West Metro, I should say. What do you think of that? That's obviously a metro line, mostly tunnel from probably Central Station through to Parramatta via Bays Precinct and the Sydney Olympic Park. What do you think about that?
Well, clearly the public transport logic and the city shaping logic for that project is very strong. I think it's another fantastic example of the way that the O'Farrell, Baird, Berejiklian governments are shaping the future of Sydney and are building vitally needed infrastructure after, frankly, 16 years of inactivity and indolence by previous governments. So I think they've got a very, very aggressive agenda. There's a huge amount of stuff being delivered. There's a huge amount of work in planning. But clearly, when we look at the demographic trends in Sydney, when we look at the traffic levels on the T1 Western Line, the case there is very strong. And I think the other very interesting thing about what they're doing is looking very closely at how it fits in with development opportunities and indeed value sharing opportunities.
And so if the case is very strong for Sydney West Metro, will the federal government stump up some cash for it?
Well, in the usual way, we have ongoing discussions with state governments around the country about projects that they are proposing, and if they're interested in the Commonwealth providing a share of funding, then they put that to us. They put a business case, that goes through an Infrastructure Australia process. So that would be the same here as with any project around the country. So we'll wait and see what they come forward with.
So Andrew Constance talked earlier around basically Sydney West Metro being a priority, and you've talked about sort of the north-south alignment to Badgerys Creek being a priority. Don't we sort of have two governments on different pages here?
No, I wouldn't say that at all. In fact, what I'd say is I think we've seen really, really good cooperative work between the two governments. The scoping study was very deliberately charged with looking at the rail needs of Western Sydney and Western Sydney Airport, not just Western Sydney Airport, but Western Sydney. What we clearly have is a set of priorities over, in some cases, 5 to 10 years, in other cases 30 to 50 years, and clearly what we're doing in a very collaborative way is working through sequencing. At the same time, of course, we have a clear plan being executed on now to deliver the road connectivity. I do want to make the point that the road connectivity will also facilitate public transport at every airport around the world. You know, buses, coaches, taxis, ride sharing are a very, very important part of how people get to airports.
But when it comes to priority, would it be fair to say that the most likely project to get started would be Sydney West Metro, followed by the north-south alignment at a later date?
Look, I think what I'd say to that is the two governments are working through the outcomes of the scoping study, which goes to what the right route should be and what the sequencing would be. So we'll have more to say about that in coming months.
I look forward to the scoping study. And just in terms of, you visited lots of airports around the world, obviously taking lessons from them. Just interested to know, how do you balance that what passengers want, and then also what airlines, which operate on wafer thin margins, as they constantly tell us, want?
It is absolutely critical that we have an airport which is attractive to the airlines. They are the decision makers in terms of whether they fly there or not. And if you look at some of those case studies I mentioned of airports which didn't go well, it was because essentially they didn't have a proposition that was attractive to the airlines. Now, of course, the airlines are will reflect the preferences of their customers, but we do need to be clear about the importance of having a proposition at this airport that is attractive to the airlines. Now, the kind of things the airlines are saying are certainly encouraging, and of course, this airport is being located where it is for a series of very good reasons, as I talked about, and that catchment area is an attractive market opportunity for the airlines. But one of the things we have very consciously done, as I mentioned, is chosen a board which is focused on meeting the needs of customers. So here, the immediate customers are the airlines, and of course other aviation operators. There may well be other segments, but the airlines in particular are a critical group of customers, and in turn then the preferences of their customers, the passengers. So that is something that we are very conscious of. We need to build a first-rate physical facility, but we need an airport which is an attractive proposition and has an attractive offering for its customers.
And just finally, Minister, a key consideration of those who live around an airport are flight paths. Yep. What guarantees can you give them that they're not going to be adversely affected? And what certainty can you give them the flight paths are still being developed?
Oh, look, there's a lot of work to do on flight paths. Just yesterday, the Forum on Western Sydney Airport had its third meeting for the year. That's our consultative forum, which will provide advice to government on community views about flight path planning, as well as a whole range of other aspects to do with the airport. So there is a very clear and thorough and measured process. It needs to go back for an environmental impact statement. That'll probably be around early 2020s. The final point I'd make there is, thanks to the good work of governments of both political persuasion, state and federal, over 30 years, the land around the airport has been protected from development to a very material extent. So we do have a very good opportunity here to take advantage of and build on that good work. Things like the commitment we've made that there'll be no single merge point over any residential area, the commitment we've made that aircraft will take off to and land from the southwest when safe to do so in the evening hours, and the indications are 80 to 90% of the time it will be safe to do that. These are all important principles, part of making sure that the airport operates with the least adverse effect on the local communities, and the land use planning is also a very important part of that, recognising that we are starting in a very good space on that.
And on that note, thank you very much, Minister. If you could join us in thanking the Minister.
Thank you. Thank you.